In this video, I'm going to explain basic anatomy of cervical spines. Okay, first thing first, how many cervical spines are there in human body? It's 7. Just for your information, how many thoracic vertebra and lumbar vertebra? Thoracic spines are 12. Lumbar spines are 5. So an easy way to remember is the time for food. Breakfast 7, lunch 12, dinner 5, right? Anyway, cervical spines 7, okay? Now, cervical spine 3 through 7 are typical cervical spines. Let's say there is spinal process. By the way, spinal process of cervical spine bifurcates like this. You see this? Spinal process. And here is transverse process like this. Very important thing is artery passes inside of transverse process. This is transverse foramen. What is this artery? This is vertebral artery. This artery is very, very important because this artery goes inside part of cranium and artery from vertebral artery goes deep to brain, such as brainstem, cerebellum, and part of cerebrum. If this artery got irritated, maybe this can affect to brainstem, cerebellum, and part of cerebrum. Very, very important artery. Thus, if your cervical spine is irritated or biomechanics is irritated, that can affect blood flow to brain, right? That is why this is very, very important. C3 through 7 are typical cervical spine. Let's go to C1 and C2. C1, C2 have very specific structure. Let's look at C1. This is C1. C1 does not have spinal process. Let's say this is spinal process of C2. Look at this. C1 does not have spinal process. So, when you try to feel spinal process, the uppermost spinal process you feel is actually C2 because C1 does not have spinal process. You are looking spinal process on upper cervical spines. Most superior spinal process you feel is C2, okay? C1 does not have spinal process. C1 has transverse process, okay? Now, C1 is called Atlas. Atlas, that's from a mythology, the god, right? This C1 looks like that supports occiput. It supports head. The Atlas is like from mythology, right? So this Atlas supports occiput. That is why this bone is called Atlas. Let's go to C2. As I said, C2 has spinal process and also C2 has transverse process. The most unique thing about C2 is there is prominent. You don't see that, but there is process inside part of C1. You see this part. So this is like axis for cervical movement. That is why C2 is called axis. This process is called dens, okay, because this process looks like tooth. So, cervical spine 1, 2 is like this. This is C2 dens, the process. So let's say this is like C1. So, C1 rotates on C2. The dens of C2 acts as axis. Now C1 can rotate. Very important structure. So Most of movement of cervical rotation happens between C1 and C2. Very, very important structure. So let's review basic structure of cervical spines. This is spinous process. Spinous process bifurcates, okay, only in cervical spines. Let's look at thoracic spines. They don't bifurcate. Let's look at lumbar spines. They don't bifurcate as well. Only spinous process in cervical spines bifurcate, okay? This is transverse process. Vertebral artery penetrates inside part of transverse process. This artery goes to inside part of cranium. Very important. Now, C1 does not have spinous process. Uppermost spinous process you feel is C2. C1 is called atlas. This is transverse process. Let's go to front view. This is C2. C2 is called axis because there's prominent inside part of C1. It's like this. So this bone acts as axis for C1. In that case, C1 can rotate on C2. Okay. So in this video, I explained basic anatomy of cervical spines. If you liked today's video, please hit the like button, comment and subscribe. See you next video.